Hello and welcome to another episode of Topline Talks, a Mackie Myers podcast hosted by me, Owen Myers.
And me, Jenna Mackie.
The aim of the show is to bring inspiring stories, insightful insights from inspirational leaders across the variety of different sectors that we serve. Our Series 3, which we're running through in 2026, is all about deep diving into core segments of the market that we specialise in. Today, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Hilary Evans-Newton, who CBE, might I add, who is the Chief Executive of Alzheimer's Research UK. Hopefully, we're going to have a great conversation today about her journey as CIO, state of medical research funding in the UK, the cause of trying to cure dementia, and lots of leadership and management lessons along the way. So, Hilary, thank you so much for giving up your time.
Pleasure. Good to be here.
Good. Amazing. So I'm just going to dive right in, if I may, and we'll probably wind back and just talk a little bit more about origin stories and things. But how do you take an organisation from a 10 million income to a 60 million income? How do you start? How do you do that? What would you advise people?
Okay, so so for context, Alzheimer's Research UK 10 years ago was sort of under £10 million income as a charity. All of our income comes from fundraised income. So we start every year on zero. It has been a story of growth and ambition. How have we done it and how we do it? I think that a lot of it has been about that ambition. So continually setting there, like, right, where are we going? Kind of looking up, looking out, what's possible for this organisation. But I guess, who we are as an organisation, we're here to ultimately find a cure for the diseases that cause dementia. That takes more money than we have. That takes momentum. That takes ambition. It's probably one of the biggest health challenges out there. So I guess for me, it's always been about, this organisation has to be in a place where we can fund the kind of research that we need. So what more do we need and what does this organisation need to look to be able to get there? And obviously, I've been doing that for over 10 years, and we continue on that kind of growth trajectory. But I think it's been about an understanding that we can't do it alone. And so from the start, being really clear that actually it's about having the right kind of partnerships, it's about having the right kind of people, and it's about having that kind of clear sort of purpose as an organisation. So those sort of 3 Ps that sort of have underpinned quite a lot of, I guess, how we've thought about delivering on that ambition.
Absolutely. I think I read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are now the largest funders of dementia-based research in Europe. Is that right?
Yeah.
But why do you think it's lagging so far behind, cancer research as an example, given I think it's by 2040, 1.4 million in the UK are forecast to suffer from Alzheimer's disease?
Yeah. I think it's there's probably a few different reasons. I think that historically dementia is just seen as something that happens when you get older.
Yeah.
So not a disease, not a medical condition. Therefore, people haven't given to medical research charities or seen it as something that you can do something about. So if you see it as this sort of inevitable, granny can't find her keys, or she's sort of losing her marbles, and she's gone into her home, and that's sort of just what happens, then essentially as a society we're sort of closing the door on those people who don't have a voice themselves. But we haven't then gone, okay, well, what's causing this? And actually there are lots of people brilliantly who can live to 1995 and they're really sharp and they're doing all these sorts of things. And so actually, what is happening? Yeah. And, the science is there. Eloise Alzheimer's discovered this condition in 1906. So it's been 120 years that we've known about the disease, and starting to then look at the sort of the brains of people that have got Alzheimer's and those that don't. And we've done some sort of public awareness pieces, really trying to position dementia and make this case. And so Change the Ending has been our sort of big current sort of brand campaign, which is about changing the ending for people with Alzheimer's and other dementias. But previous to that, we ran a campaign called Share the Orange. And actually, it was about trying to talk about the condition where we weren't necessarily talking about brains or showing pictures of brains or being too medical about it, because often that can be scary. It's a really scary condition. and the stigma around it, but actually the orange signified the difference between the physical weight of someone's brain with Alzheimer's disease and someone's brain who didn't have Alzheimer's disease. So the weight of the orange is the difference between the two. So the smaller brain is the one that's had Alzheimer's disease, essentially because the brain mass has shrunk and the deterioration of brain cells.
Yeah.
So I think it has been about kind of the public's understanding of the condition. So only 1 in 4 members of the British public saw Alzheimer's as being a disease, and dementia has been caused by diseases like Alzheimer's disease when we started this over 10 years ago. I think that's starting to shift, but it's still the sort of more prevalent view. So I think that's been the challenge. And we haven't seen the progress. So we haven't seen the progress that we've had in cancer. So for the, 400 cancer charities that are probably out there, and I'd say sort of 750 million that Cancer Research UK bringing in income, which is fantastic. A number of our lives have been touched by cancer, but at least as many touched by dementia.
Totally.
And so I think the kind of motivation now to do something in this space is absolutely there. But we don't have people who've survived dementia and out there as kind of, waving the flag and doing the running races and talking about the drugs that they've taken and the clinical trials that they've been. We're starting to get there. We are starting to get there, and we're cracking actually what the treatments might look like and what those kind of pathways could be. And better diagnostics. We don't diagnose people generally who are living with dementia. So only 2% of our patient population with dementia have got what would be seen as a kind of gold standard diagnosis, which the majority of people with cancer will absolutely get. And you will have a pathway. You will be offered clinical trials. There will be treatments. There will be things we can do to improve your life, even if we can't cure it. And sadly, we're not there for dementia, but we're at the sort of foothills.
Yeah. And just to lean into that a little bit, and talk about your sort of leadership style, because I think just that some of the content and sort of bios around you that are out there is obviously this is more than just a professional endeavour for you because of your personal experiences with Alzheimer's disease. How do you feel leading from a sort of purposeful standpoint impacts how you run the charity?
I mean, I think that, I have personal experience of dementia in my grandparents. I had professional experience of working in health and social care and older people from working in Age Concern and Age UK.
Yeah.
And those did sort of come together as a motivational kind of pull, I guess, to Alzheimer's Research UK. But the biggest pull at that time was actually this organisation that had so much opportunity, and I could really see the sort of ambition and where we could take it. But throughout then that journey, sadly, 2 very close members of my family, one's passed away, one's living with Alzheimer's disease. And so the sort of next generation is now living with it and sort of seeing, not enough has changed in essentially sort of 30 odd years since my grandparents passed away.
Yeah.
And it is that constant reminder that we're not doing enough. And even for my family, I understand sort of roughly how to navigate these systems, know a little bit about dementia. And similarly, other members of my family who've got sort of medical backgrounds, it's really, really tough. And so you feel the kind of sharp end of what that looks like and slowly losing someone to that condition and being really helpless. And so I think it's that constant reminder that we need to do more and we need to go faster. And so I think that it probably does change kind of how I lead that organisation. And I like to spend time with our supporters. A number of them either might have a diagnosis themselves or they've looked after family members who've had it and now really want to support our charity in a fundraising and campaigning, doing all sorts of different things for us. And so that, for me, that's a big part of my job in terms of, I guess, being that voice back to, what's the impact that's having? How is that sort of shifting the dial in terms of what we do, but actually the bigger picture of what's happening out there? And I guess my mind is often, I am a big picture thinker. I'm often grappling, should we do it here, should we go there? And I think that's sort of my role almost as a kind of chief cheerleader of the organisation, of our people. But actually, for me, it's the, million people that are living with it today and those families who are impacted. And we know that, 1 in 2 of us are going to be impacted because essentially you're either going to get it yourself or you're going to be looking after a family member who's got it.
Yeah. Leaning into the chief cheerleader point, for any charity leaders that are sort of listening or watching, how have you tried to navigate fundraising? Because obviously, cost of living crises and, all the turbulent macro stuff that's going on, most charities have seen a decrease in their capability to fundraise. Any sort of learns or insights from that in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's Look, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's really tough fundraising environment out there. You know, I think you've got to try and be a step ahead. You've got to be quite sort of savvy about, you know, how you fundraise, what that looks like. Ultimately, it's about, you know, what it is you're doing, the impact that you're having. And actually, if you're telling that clear story and you are driven by the kind of purpose and the output that your organisation has, then I think you're in a stronger position. Having said that, there's lots of brilliant charities who can do that, and the fundraising environment's difficult. I think that, you know, we've always been quite purposeful of having a diverse fundraising portfolio. So actually, we're not beholden to any one area of fundraising, and that certainly helps us when there are challenges. And you know, certainly through the pandemic, that was a tough time for charities where it was very much in the sort of unknown. It's tough now in terms of kind of cost of living. I think what we are seeing is that, you know, our supporters are sticking with us. And, you know, if anything, I think they sort of see medical research charities as in these times needing more and more support.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're fortunate in that respect, but certainly don't take it for granted. And I think, you know, it continues to be tough. But we've got to make that case that, you know, now is not the time to walk away from this condition, and we need that support, whether that's £3 a month, whether that's a bake sale, a marathon, or a huge sort of 7-figure gift.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a chicken and egg situation though, because obviously you need more funding and more research to get the breakthroughs that you need, but without the breakthroughs, people are holding back to fundraise specifically to Alzheimer's. So how do you navigate that? Kind of chicken and egg?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely where we've been for quite a lot of the last sort of 10, 11 years. And it's really challenging because actually a lot of the time, you know, what are you positioning? What are you selling? You're selling hope. Because actually, that's where we want to get to. You know, one day we will find a cure. We will have these treatments. We will have better diagnostics. Yeah. And then you look to, okay, well, this clinical trial hasn't worked, or actually, you know, we aren't able to diagnose people, and actually people haven't got access to some of the treatments that are already there. And that is challenging, but I think that has really shifted. You know, the sort of focus that we had in dementia, and particularly actually sort of the UK really leading the way. So neuroscience in the UK is probably one of the best places to be doing neuroscience. The fact that we've got the NHS and the ability to work within a health system and brilliant patient data, you know, as a place for kind of life sciences to invest, and an incredible medical research charity community, which is pretty unique. You know, it makes all of those things, I think, if you're going to support medical research, the UK is a great place to be doing it. Yeah. You know, we've always then looked at, you know, as a charity funder, and we've grown in the last 10 years, but, you know, still in terms of medical research funding, you know, it's relatively small pots of money. But actually, how do we use that money wisely? So where are the gaps? Where are the bridges that actually we can work and bring others in, where we can be a bit of a catalyst? And I think that, again, just helps tell that story of actually, yes, we haven't got it all there and we can't lay it out in front of you. And actually, if we had, then we probably wouldn't be here asking for your support and your money. But actually, this is then where we can make a difference and where your support can make a difference. Yeah. And actually, there's always those little proof points and glimmers, and there's things that you can learn when things haven't gone as well. And so I think that's the other thing. But it tends to be different almost in terms of the different audiences you might be talking to. So some people are very interested in the kind of, I absolutely want to see a proof point. Yeah. And others are, I need to do something for Alzheimer's Research UK because I've just lost my mum, and I want to do something in her memory. But I want to do something because I don't want my children to be in the same position that I was looking up. Yeah, so there's that sort of emotional pull, I think, towards then supporting the organisations and the people leading them. Yeah,
and you say you have found some developments that people have come out of the other side of dementia and been cured. Did you say earlier?
We have some treatments.
Fine.
Yeah. So for early stage Alzheimer's disease, there are 2 licensed treatments in the UK. So they're not available on the NHS.
Okay.
They certainly won't work for all. It very much is kind of early stage Alzheimer's disease, but these are the first disease modifying drugs.
Wow.
So that's a huge breakthrough in itself. And we also have a blood test, several blood tests. So looking at blood tests that we can start to sort of think about how we could screen people who would be at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, but also as a diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
And that in itself, a blood test is going to be much easier and cheaper and much nicer for patients than a brain scan or lumbar punctures, which are very invasive and costly and not particularly nice for patients. So, the better diagnostics and treatments coming through that essentially are removing the amyloid, so the toxic buildup in the brain. Of people with Alzheimer's disease. So those two things alone in the past few years are big breakthroughs where we can point to, this is what the science is doing. These are the developments. There is a drug on the shelf that can be used. Unfortunately, only people paying privately can access that in the UK at the moment. But we hope that will shift. And like you've seen with pretty much every other disease area, you start somewhere and the drugs get better and they're more effective. And they're easy to administer. So at the moment, these drugs are relatively complex to administer, but we can see in the United States, that's already moving to a different way of being able to deliver these drugs. So things are shifting.
That's amazing.
At a relatively rapid pace, actually.
Yeah. I think we're living in an era where AI, automation, technology is like at the forefront of everyone's mind. And that's whether you are a life sciences, medical research business, all the way through to financial services. But I think AI is particularly interesting when it comes to things like diagnostics and areas like that. So what's been your adoption of it since kind of, I don't know, the big like red alert AIs come out over the last kind of 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, sort of several approaches. So from a sort of scientific perspective, I think it's really, really interesting. So from, digital biomarkers and diagnostics and, the use of technology in terms of how we can pick up in changes in people's cognition before they realise it themselves or their family would know any difference. So, things about how people use their phones or their wearable devices and the sorts of things that they will pick up about how we're walking, how we're talking, how we're sleeping, how we're speaking into our phone, how we're using emails, all those sorts of things. There's some fascinating work happening in that space. Lots of different ways about thinking about how we can use it kind of to underpin some of those diagnostics, but also in terms of then kind of monitor and support people living with the condition and in their homes. So there's lots of work happening in that space. I mean, I think from an organisational perspective, it is about, how can we be early adopters? What does it mean in terms of leading an organisation, running an organisation? How can we be more efficient, more effective? I mean, I see where I am now. I guess we've sort of had a growth period of the last 10 years, but I've set some pretty punchy ambitions between now and 2031. So the sort of next stage of our strategy of saying, right, okay, how do we double in size again in terms of our income? What does that look like? And I think underpinning that is a big program around digital data technology and AI being sort of central to that in terms of the platforms we're using and what that looks like. And then the second part is our kind of people and culture.
So to pick up on those 2 points, I mean, if you're looking to double, you're essentially continuously transforming as an organisation. So, I mean, on the people and the culture piece, as an example, how have you kind of approached that?
So I guess people from an Alzheimer's Research UK perspective, so our employees and our supporters and our ambassadors and our trustees, all of that in terms of actually the people behind us as an organisation and what that looks like, as being absolutely central to that. And I think I've had some brilliant board members and chairs of our board who've, all come from, as they often are, kind of illustrious careers in the city and in companies. And actually one of the things I've learned from them is actually it's about people and it's about relationships. And actually if you can get the kind of premise of that right, then you can fly and teams can fly. And so I think it then is about actually people being unified behind, the cause and the ambition. And with charities, you could say you sort of take some of that for granted in that actually, people come to charities because they want to do good and they want to, often have had personal experience, not always, but, have chosen to work in that particular field. And so I think that that does bring probably higher expectations in terms of actually how we lead people and how we support people. But it's then the kind of culture that we want to set. And I think we've done quite a lot of work in terms of, defining who we are as an organisation, our sort of leadership styles, our attributes, and, a number of different kind of programmes that we have developed and run internally kind of to support leaders within the organisation. We've always said, the leaders in the organisation are at every level. It's not you're in the senior leadership team. You are leading whatever it is that you're doing for this organisation, and you are part of ultimately finding this cure. And I think for everyone to really feel that and to see that and to see kind of where their role fits. So we've always been very clear that, actually the research that we fund and the sort of end game as to where we are just wouldn't happen if we didn't have all of these different parts of this organisation. And, when I started, it was sort of the bare bones really of an organisation or as a charity. And actually the elements that we had of the organisation were probably the more external parts of it. So, research team or a communications team and some fundraisers. But the kind of underpinning enablers that allowed us to operate as an organisation, were probably sort of external support. And there were, quite a few gaps to that, actually. So it was pretty much kind of, roll your sleeves up, and we all got involved and did all different bits of running the organisation. Obviously, we're now at quite a different space, but actually a lot of that has been, bringing in a people team, bringing in a finance team, bringing in an IT team. We didn't have any kind of data team. So all of that, the kind of building blocks are absolutely key. But we're now at the stage where we're doing the kind of next reiteration. We've just brought in a new people director who's got brilliant experience kind of across the sector, to really think about, okay, what does that next stage look like? And actually probably now have the opportunity to be a little bit more purposeful and think about how we do that rather than doing it as we go. And I think, that's probably the shift of almost being in a kind of a startup kind of mindset of like all hands on deck, right? We're just going to run with this. This is where we're going to go and we're going to get there. And now it's, okay, right, these are the things that we're going to need in terms of that growth. And how do we ensure that we are supporting our people to kind of get to that end goal? And I think when you've got an organisation full of sort of 300 odd people who, they're all ambitious, everyone wants to get there faster, everyone's got ideas, I'd love to do it all, but we can't. And actually we have to be quite disciplined. I have to quite be disciplined with myself to be like, no, actually we have to say no to that. And we can't do that thing. And it sounds amazing, but actually this is the bit we've got to focus on right now, guys, because this is where we get. And so I think that sort of discipline, but and that comes back down to kind of, how you're kind of clear with teams and people and the communications right, so that everyone kind of knows where we're all heading and we're going the same way. So we've done quite a lot of work with our sort of heads of department and leadership teams to really kind of bring them into some of our thinking, and to sort of support then thinking out what that strategy looks like to then get to that 2031 goal.
Yeah. If the North Star is curing dementia and Alzheimer's disease, how do you keep people aligned to that goal, given actually that that's quite a far away and there's going to be lots of sort of zigzags in the road?
It's about looking at, say, either it's something that we might be funding or sort of some communications work or some underpinning organisational work. Does that help us achieve our end goal? And which bit does that kind of plug into? And does that help us get there faster, more effectively? And then, the different, depending on where you are in the organisation and what you're doing, I think it's kind of a useful sort of reminder. And I think that it's, organisations and charities especially, you need to have that really kind of ambitious end goal. And I guess as an organisation, we've gone from, in the early days it was Alzheimer's Research Trust, essentially funding research, great. We moved to defeating dementia, and it was all about kind of the fact that you could do it. And then it was about making breakthroughs possible, because actually that's where we were in the science. Let's have those breakthroughs, and the incremental breakthroughs will get us there. And then, For a Cure has been the last sort of 2-3 years. And really, I think it's a sign of, it's punchy, it's confident, that's where we need to get to. And I think that you've seen other organisations, like NSPCC had their famous sort of full stop campaign, we're going to end cruelty to children. And, unfortunately, that might be something we can never completely achieve, but absolutely that should be what that charity is aiming to do. And so for us, ultimately, a cure itself can take many forms, and ultimately the cure is, preventing the disease from ever happening to start with. Actually, people who then do get the disease are offered a series of different interventions and treatments that will enable them to live independently without some of the symptoms of dementia. And then the better diagnostics, so we're arming people so that they understand what's happening with their brain health and what they can do to reduce your risk. So increasingly, we know there's a lot that you can do to reduce your risk of developing dementia, particularly in midlife. So actually, as an organisation, how we're going about doing that. So, a cure itself there's going to be no sort of silver bullet. There's going to be no kind of one medicine that's going to be able to do that. And a bit like cancer, there are many diseases that cause dementia, and we'll probably start talking more about those specific diseases. So there's that kind of ongoing, I guess, communication piece with the public about kind of where we are from a scientific perspective. And it's the medical research charities, I would say, that are the people that are doing that kind of communication piece to the public. And actually, you look at the evidence, I think it was some YouGov polling, the most trusted voice are medical research charities. So, that is where people, if they're maybe worried about their brain health, or that they might be developing some worrying signs around losing memory, they will go to those organisations where there's credited information. And so I think, there's a really key role for the charities there.
Yeah. What are the top 3 things that people should be doing in their midlife to help prevent Alzheimer's?
So,
just, not selfishly or anything, but
so there are a number of things kind of across a life course that can reduce your risk of developing dementia. So some of those things we can't do a huge amount about. So at the length of time in early education, for example. But other things around sort of midlife, actually, air pollution plays a role, smoking, not drinking too much, keeping your weight in check, keeping your blood pressure in check, exercise, regular exercise. So you often say, what's kind of good for the heart is good for the head. And that sort of rings true. So all the sorts of things around healthy living. But I think people don't necessarily associate that with that those things all have a knock-on effect and help your brain health. So we sort of know you're actually going to reduce our cholesterol, we're going to reduce our risk of stroke or heart disease. And we've kind of, as a generation, kind of grown up with those messages of, we need to keep fit and we need to... but actually, if you do those things, you will lower your risk of developing particularly vascular dementia. So vascular dementia, maybe sort of 30-35% of people that have got dementia will be vascular dementia. It's different from Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia or dementia with Lewy bodies. But certainly for vascular dementia, actually your vascular health, which often includes your brain, there are a number of things you can do. And then actually, later on in life, things like ensuring you have a hearing aid if you need one. So actually, hearing loss that you're not doing anything about is a problem. Sight, and then things like, keeping your brain active, throughout life. So actually, we all heard about, doing Sudoku or the crossword, but keeping mentally active in whatever way that is, as well as social interactions as well. But sort of hearing loss, certainly as you get older, is probably the key thing that you should be doing something about. So, so there's a number of things that you can do. So I think, for what a cure looks like, actually, if we can get more and more people taking action sort of in midlife through, and actually, as a condition, if you'd say, kind of is dementia or Alzheimer's disease a condition of later life or midlife or early life? Actually it is throughout life about how we look after our brain, but primarily it's probably a disease of midlife. We just don't really get the symptoms until later on in life. And actually by the time we've got symptoms, it's not a huge amount that we can do. So the disease modifying treatments coming through will work for people in the early stages of Alzheimer's, probably before they're that symptomatic. So that's why we need blood tests. So we can't wait until actually at the moment where you've got symptoms, and often kind of a little way down that line, where people are going to their GP or their family are sort of saying, look, I think we ought to talk to someone. Actually, by then, ultimately, a lot of the damage in the brain is there, and it's very difficult to reverse that. You can't reverse cell death, certainly not yet. And so I think, so the sort of changing conversation around the condition has been fascinating, and actually in those 10 years, I think that's shifted massively. And I think as an organisation, we've sort of positioned ourselves as a challenger brand because we relatively sort of young, newish organisation. There are other sort of bigger established charities out there doing some great work in different spaces. And we said, actually, we don't have the budgets, we don't have the advertising budgets, we don't have the the kind of high street brand recognition, certainly back then. How can we talk about this differently, and how do we make people sit up and think about it? So we did quite a bit of work in terms of kind of rethinking and reframing how we talked about it. So, for example, the Share the Orange campaign, it was a very different way of talking about it. But actually, for the first time on national TV, we were talking about, dementia causing death. We were talking about it being a devastating disease and the reality of this condition for families that are going through it in a much more sort of hard-hitting way, but trying to do that without, I guess, falling into maybe some of the stereotypes of people that are living with the condition.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing around kind of stigma, that families still don't want to talk about it. It is really scary, and we know it's the number one condition that people are most scared of because there isn't enough that we can do. So actually, where cancer has gone from being the big C that no one would say cancer in the 70s and early to actually, got a diagnosis of cancer. Oh, actually, we've caught it earlier, and we're going to do this. And we're going to. The conversation's changed massively on it. It's changing in dementia, but we're not yet where we need to be. And I think that's the thing that kind of keeps us in a kind of, right, this is where we're going. This is where we've got to grow. This is what this organisation. There's a real need for this organisation to think differently and sort of challenge a bit of the status quo.
Yeah.
And that's something, I guess, that for me always has just sat very easily with me.
Totally.
And I think has probably helped our growth because we have attracted those sorts of thinkers.
Yeah.
I'd like to finish, if I may, by a question, or lessons in leadership potentially. We can badge it. One thing that sticks out hugely about your profile is your ability to build consensus. I mean, you co-chair a government program, a government dementia program, some international committees, et cetera, et cetera. So for anyone that's maybe in a lower middle management job through to an executive running an organisation, what would you say the best thing you've learned to kind of get yourself out there, build consensus, influence, and it could, it could be cross sectors, right? And you could be in a finance team or a fundraising team or whatever. It'd be really interesting your take on that side.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely think there's kind of opportunities for everyone in whatever role they are in organisations. And I think for me, it has always been, thinking about that kind of bigger picture. Who else is out there working in this space? We've always had to work in partnership. So kind of going out there and literally just getting, building those kind of human relationships has been really key. So, a number of those people that we work with kind of internationally, particularly, have become friends that I've worked very closely with. And you've got that kind of aligned sort of way of thinking. So I think there is a bit about kind of finding those people who maybe either are sort of thinking in the same way as you, or you can sort of see how you might be able to kind of learn or work together. And so I think I've always tried to reach out to people who might be able to, and being quite open and asking for help. And I came in as a CEO, first chief exec job. I was here for a little while as director first, but stepped into the chief exec job in my mid-30s. There weren't many women in their mid-30s as a chief exec, particularly at some of the big global meetings. And so I was kind of, I did sort of go out there and look for those who I could learn from and be quite unashamedly kind of almost, ask for that kind of mentory role, but also kind of look around the table sometimes and think, well, actually, often minority of them were women, but certainly younger, and say, well, actually, I'll kind of use that as my, this is the opportunity to say something different, do something different, because I do look a bit different from this table. And, that's shifted in lots of ways. And also, I'm 10 years older, but I think it's, for me, I think the building of those relationships is absolutely key. Kind of aligning and seeing how you can help other people achieve what they're trying to achieve. But also, I'm someone who I like to get involved in things. So actually seeing what else is happening, and often, say to colleagues, get involved with other organisations. There's so many brilliant charities in the UK. It doesn't have to be medical research. Volunteer, we have volunteering days, and supporting people being trustees in other charities. There's lots of small community charities where people live, or kids sports groups and stuff. Like, get involved in some of that as a trustee, because they need the kind of input into, particularly people from a finance or governance perspective. But you can learn a lot then about the workings of the organisation. So actually, if you're then looking to build up your professional career, actually, you've been in those conversations where you're having conversations around risk or leadership of a charity as a trustee. So I think there's lots of ways that you can sort of go about doing that. But definitely I'm one for kind of putting your hand up and trying to get involved in whatever way you can. And I'm not always certainly as when I was younger, I definitely was never the person to get up and do any kind of public speaking or push myself forward. But then you sort of, the more you sort of do it, you realise that, well, actually, no one's massively comfortable doing it. You kind of build a bit of confidence, and then you realise actually that it's really important that you do use your voice. And so I think, particularly anyone working in the kind of non-profit sector, there are a lot of ways of being able to mentor and support and people out there. The Charity Mentor program that we're signed up to, I think, is one of those. But yeah, just sort of reaching out and getting involved. And I'm always trying to kind of help others who, emerging new chief execs, and sort of support them, or people who thinking about where they kind of take their career. And often, from the corporate sector, saying, actually, I want to come in, and how do I find a way into working in a non-profit? And I think they often find it's more aligned to working in a commercial organisation than they thought it was.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, unfortunately we have run out of time, but that has absolutely flown by. But plenty of amazing insights, and really thanks for sharing all of your experience and insights.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's been fascinating. Thank you. And that's another episode of Topline Talks. You know where to find us. Do hit subscribe. You can also see the whole video on our website as well. Thank you, Hilary, ever so much, and see you all soon.